أحبائنا المشاهدين، أهلا ومرحبا بكم في حلقة جديدة من برنامجهم المسيحي والمجتمع. في الحقيقة أنا بعتبر الحلقة النهاردة مهمة جدا لأنها بتخص حياة كثيرين منا، خاصة العائلات اللي أولادها دلوقتي بيدخلوا في المدارس وبيتلقوا التعليم في المدارس العامة والحكومية. أتذكر أنني حينما أتيت إلى الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية أكثر من 45 سنة، قربت على 50 سنة، جيت هنا عشان آجي لبلد الحرية، عشان عرفت أن البلد دي بتؤمن، بسموها land of the free، بلد الأحرار، home of the brave، الشجعان، الناس اللي عندهم شجاعة. وعرفت أن البلد دي كلها قايمة على اللي بيسموه الجوديو كريستيان برينسبلز، المبادئ المسيحية اللي موجودة في الإنجيل في العهد القديم وفي العهد الجديد. جيت عشان أتمتع بحرية التعبير عن نفسي، وأقدر أعبر عن آرائي، وأقدر أعيش الحياة اللي أنا بردها لنفسي ولأولادي. ولما جيت من حوالي 50 سنة أو أقل شوية، كانت معظم المبادئ دي مظبوطة، وشفنا أن البلد هنا فعلا تؤمن بمبادئ نبيلة وسامية تتماشى مع مبادئ الإنجيل. بدأت أمريكا تتغير بمجيء كثير من المهاجرين الجدد، بعض منهم لم يكن يؤمنوا بالمسيحية ولم يكن مسيحيين، فكان طبيعي أنهم يطالبوا بأن المبادئ المسيحية لا تفرض عليهم. وابتدت فكرة أن يكون في نوع من الفصل بين الكنيسة وبين الدولة، separation of state and church. والمبدأ ده ابتدى يجذب فكرة أنه مفيش داعي ندرس المبادئ المسيحية في المدارس. معظم الناس قبلوا هذا الأمر من واقع أنه من حقهم، ده مش مسيحي، مش لازم أفرض عليه أفكاري المسيحية. شوية بشوية ابتدوا يقولوا لا، احنا مش عاوزكم تفرضوا آرائنا علينا، لكن مش عاوزين أي حاجة تمثل المسيحية. كل الصور اللي تمثل الديانة المسيحية اللي في حياتنا لازم نشيلها. فبطلوا مثلا الصلاة في الكنائس، بطلوا ان احنا نشوف علامة in God we trust موجودة على الجنيه الأمريكي أو الدولار الأمريكي، أو بعض العلامات زي مثلا هنا في المنطقة اللي احنا عايشين فيها، كان في سانتا مونيكا في وقت الكريسماس يحطوا صور العذراء والمسيح وهو مولود، بيسموها الناتيفيتي سينز. كل الحاجات دي قالوا لازم تتشال، ونجحوا انهم يشيلوها. وقلنا ممكن ده بيضايق بعض الناس، هنقبل هذا الامر. ابتدى بقى دلوقتي الوضع يتغير بطريقة مزعجة، لانهم مش عايزين اي تعليم مسيحي يتقدم لينا، بل بالعكس عاوزين يفرضوا علينا تعاليم ضد الإيمان والمبادئ المسيحية، ويضطرونا ويضطر أولادنا إنهم يقبلوها. ده الأمر اللي لا يمكن نقبله ومش لازم نقبله، وده ضد كل المبادئ اللي قامت عليها أمريكا، ومبادئ الحرية والتعبير عن الرأي، وأيضا كل المبادئ بحرية الشخص في إنه يؤمن باللي يؤمن بيه. أنا بقول المقدمة دي عشان ندخل على الموضوع اللي بنتكلم عليه النهاردة، اللي هو sex education in public schools، التعليم اللي بيعلموها لأولادنا في المدارس الحكومية. والنهاردة هنعرف عن فكرة sex education دي جت امتى ابتدت في المدارس، وايه الغرض كان منها، وايه الهدف، وايه تفسيرهم او تعليلهم لانه الاولاد لازم يتعلموا هذا الامر. ايضا هنتعرف على مراحل اللي مر بيها هذا التعليم، واللي وصل ايه لمرحلة ايه النهاردة. وربما الحاجات اللي هتسمعوها النهاردة ربما تكون صادمة لكثيرين. انا اؤكد لكم ان انا لما شفت الصور اللي ورهاني عن الامور اللي بتتقال للاولاد انا صدمت. هنشوف هذا الامر. ايضا هنعرف هل الامر ده مفرض عليك، هل ممكن انك انت تغير هذا الامر، هل من حقك ان ترفض هذا الامر. كل هذه الأسئلة وكل الإجابات هنجاوب عليها إن شاء الله في هذه الحلقة. وأنا في الحقيقة يسعدني جدا النهاردة معايا ضيفين لأول مرة يكونوا معانا، لكن بالتأكيد هم أكتر اتنين ممكن يردوا على هذه الأسئلة. I'm very happy and pleased to welcome both of you today. Let me introduce you with few words. So first I want to introduce David Lowellen. I hope I got that right. David actually is a practicing attorney right now, but he was the former dean of the School of Law at Trinity University. He's now specialized in religious rights and religious freedoms, and he has a long history. I'm very aware of some of the issues that he tackled and was able to voice the voice of the Christians and defend the rights of the Christians in the United States. David, I welcome you to Logos TV.
Good to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. I also would love to, for the first time now, to introduce Abby Bales. And Abby is an amazing lady. Let me start by her having 4 children. Wasn't that enough to have you a full-time job? But that wasn't enough for Abby. Abby is also a radio personality, and she actually has a radio show at KKLA's. It's a nationally syndicated Christian talk radio show. يتسمع على مستوى أمريكا كلها. And بالإضافة لكده, actually she is a member of Northridge School District.
Oh, the president of the Northridge West Neighborhood Council.
Oh, okay. Does that include Porter Ranch?
Just under the 118, so not quite.
Oh, okay.
It's a separate neighborhood council.
Because I did live in Porter Ranch for a long period of time.
We're your neighbors, just to the south.
Well, in addition to that, that's how I met her, through my wife who works with her at a program called CEF,
Child Evangelism Fellowship.
Child Evangelist Fellowship. It's a wonderful program. بأنهم بيروحوا بعد المدرسة ما تنتهي، بعد المدرسة ما تروح بيعملوا زي نادي، زي كلاب، وياخدوا الأولاد فيه. الأولاد بيجي لهم 70 80 100 طفل ويكلموهم عن المسيح وعن ربنا. وانتوا عارفين انه الموضوع ده ما كانش مصرح بيه، لكن قدروا انهم يجيبوا تصريح خاص انهم يعملوا الحكايه دي. I was telling them how this was not allowed, the CF, but then you got, and should we thank David for that? He has something to do with it?
Whenever I have a legal issue, I call David.
You go back to him. And you get it for free, huh?
I do. I have a deal worked out.
Wonderful. David, let me set the stage for the topic. The topic of issue here today is the sex education. But let me get everybody to understand, because sometimes we get confused about that. We hear a lot about separation of church and state. And for that reason, everybody is afraid to voice out our concerns as Christians, because we're afraid now we're infringing on this idea. Can you briefly, in few words, tell us how does that affect our lives?
Well, it's true that many people are concerned about whether or not they can speak about their faith in public, try to influence public officials or public policy, because they're afraid of this idea of separation of church and state. But separation of church and state is not actually in the Constitution, but it came from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Convention back in 1801. And he wanted to assure them that this new country would protect their religious liberty. And he said there's a wall of separation protecting your church from incursion by the state. And that idea of protecting religion was the original idea of separation of church and state.
Interesting. ديفيد بيقول انه فكره الفصل بين الكنيسه والتشيرش دي مش موجوده في الكونستيتيوشن، ودي حاجه غريبه انا اول مره اسمعها. احنا كلنا فاكرين ان ده جزء من الكونستيتيوشن. بيقول ان دي اتعملت برساله بعتها توماس جيفرسون للكنيسه من الكنائس، بيقول لهم ان احنا لازم نفصل بحيث ان احنا نحمي الكنائس. الهدف منها حمايه الكنائس مش العكس.
But then from the years about 1960, there's some cases in 1962, 63, the Bible reading in public schools cases, through about the year 2000, the wall was used for exactly the opposite of what its intended purpose was. Instead of protecting religions, churches, and Christians from incursion by the state, it was turned around and protected the state from being influenced by Christians and by religious people. Everybody else of every other ideology could try to influence the state to support their ideology, but not Christians, not religious people. And that's the opposite of what was actually intended by the wall of separation metaphor.
بيقول سنة 2000 يعني في البداية كان الهدف انه الكنيسة تحمى من تأثير السلطة عليها. بيقول في سنة 2000 ابتدى الاتجاه ده يتغير، والأول مرة بقى الموضوع بالعكس تماما، انه الستيت او الإدارة الحاكمة ما تتأثرش بالكنيسة، ما تقدرش الكنيسة تروح تقول لهم اعملوا لي أي حاجة. على عكس أي ديانة تانية، أي مبدأ تاني يقدر يقول له رأيه، إلا المسيحيين ما يقدروش يقولوا رأيهم. وبيقول ان مش ده الاساس اللي على اساسه اتعمل الوول ده اللي سموه الحائط اللي يفصل بين التشيرش والستيت.
But then in the year 2000 up through just a few years ago, the Supreme Court began to see that they had made a mistake. And they began to recognize that what was happening to Christians was that the state wasn't being protected by denying Christians the ability to influence the state. The state was discriminating against Christians. It's only religious people who couldn't get their public policies adopted because they're religious. We can't support religion, separation of church and state. And everyone else could do it. And so the Supreme Court realized that what was actually happening was Christians and churches were being discriminated against. And now the current doctrine is much more protective for religious liberty and much more open to allow Christians to influence the government in a proper way.
وبيقول انه في الوقت الحالي السوبريم كورت او المحكمة العليا ادركت انه الطريقة اللي كانت الامور بتمشي فيها في نوع من التمييز ضد رجال الدين المسيحي، وان مش ده الهدف الاساسي. فابتدى دلوقتي الوضع يتغير شوية، وبقى اسهل على الكنيسة انها تبدي رأيها زيها زي اي حد تاني، ومبقاش فيه تمييز ضدهم. Fantastic background, and in a way good news, because we're hearing now that they are listening and they are hearing and they want to make it fair to everybody to voice their opinion.
Unfortunately, though, they waited too long to solve the problem, and all of these anti-religious forces, such as in sex education, we're coming to, built up a lot of momentum, which we still have to deal with. So the problem has been technically corrected, but there's still a lot of bad influence from the mistakes the Supreme Court and the courts made about keeping religion out of the public square for some 40 years.
فبيقول انه رغم انهم ابتدوا يغيروا شويه دلوقتي، لكن تاثير 40 سنه من التفسير الخاطئ للحكايه دي خلى ناس كتيره تستغلها باستغلال سيء، زي موضوع السكس اديوكيشن اللي احنا هنتكلم عليه النهارده، اللي ربما استخدم بهذه الطريقه بحيث يمنعوا الصوت الديني ان هو ياثر على موضوع السكس education. And that, Abby, takes us to the topic we're talking about,
right,
which is the sex education. So your dad said that this is an influence for 40 years that
yes,
really have set the stage for them to come and turn things around. Take us from there.
Well, sex education started in the United States around World War I, and it was largely put in place to prevent the soldiers who were increasing STDs in the population, to teach them about how to be healthy, protect themselves sexually so they wouldn't spread sexually transmitted disease among the population. So that was stage one.
So المرحلة الأولى أو أول مرة اتعمل في الحرب العالمية الأولى، وكان الهدف منه إن يمنع الجنود من إنهم يجي لهم الأمراض الجنسية اللي كانت بتجي لهم sexually transmitted diseases اللي كانت بتجي لهم من إن وجودهم والسكس اللي كانوا بيعملوه من غير أي فهم للأمور دي، فعشان كده عاوزين يعلموهم على الطرق السليمة.
Right. And then the second phase in the United States was in the 60s, during the sexual revolution, the 60s and 70s. Sex education kind of reared up again, and they were pushing back against the abstinence-based education that had been provided for years, teaching kids that you get married, a man and woman get married, they have sex, that's the safest way to protect yourself against STDs. Instead, they were teaching radical ideas during the sexual revolution. So sex education changed, and it was put into the public schools around that time.
المرحلة الثانية جات في الستينات والسبعينيات. ابتدوا بقى يقدموا فكرة جديدة. قبل كده كانوا بيقولوا للناس انه السكس ده ما يحصلش الا لما يتجوزوا وساعتها يقدروا يمارسوا الجنس. ده التعليم اللي كانوا بيعلموه للاولاد. فابتدت التعليم ده يتغير خالص في الستينات والسبعينيات، وبدل ما بيقولوا الابستنس اللي هو عدم ممارسة الجنس لغاية لما يحصل الجواز، ابتدوا يقدموا صورة مختلفة تمام لطبيعة العلاقة الجنسية بين الأولاد حتى في سن مبكر.
Right. So we see this pendulum swinging. So it got a little out of control. And then the abstinence-based education was shifted to something called comprehensive sex education. And now what we have in nearly every state is comprehensive sex education. And that is not, it was originally sold as based on healthy sex, teaching about use of condoms and other kinds of contraception. But it has led to some of the highest rates of teenage pregnancy in the 90s. We hit our high in the 90s of teenage sexual activity, teenage pregnancy, abortion. So it's been a disaster, comprehensive sex education, but that's where it began. So now what we have is 33 states out of the 50 require sex education to be taught in their schools. And in the rest of them, it's optional, but it's happening everywhere. So that's the history. That's where we've come to today. We have comprehensive sex ed.
اوكي. فالمرحلة اللي بعد كده بتتكلم عليها انه ابتدوا يقدموا باللي بيسموه comprehensive sex education او تعليم جنسي مفصل او مشروح بطريقة اطول. وابتدوا اساس قالوا يعني احنا عشان نعلم البنات انهم يعملوا او الاولاد انهم يعملوا بيسموه سيف سكس، يعني ياخدوا الممارسه الجنسيه بس من دون ما يسببوا حمل وولاده. لكن بتقول انه الحكايه دي كانت كارثه كبيره، لانه عدد اللي حصل السكس بسبب تعليمهم من السكس وحصل البريجنسي عددهم زاد جدا جدا، وابتدوا يدركوا انه الامر ده مش بيحقق الهدف منه. Now let me just play the devil's advocate or just tell you what would anybody say, if you speak to somebody who's behind this idea, will tell you, listen, the kids will learn about it.
Sure.
Regardless of what you teach them or not, and it's better to learn about it in a school curriculum than in the locker room or in the playground. What would you say to that?
A couple things. One is I wanted to talk about how it's shifted recently and why we're talking about it here. Because if you grew up in the United States and went to public school like I did, and I'm, at that time when comprehensive sex education was the standard, you think of sex ed as being about safe sex, but it's different now. There are 3 goals of current sex education. Number 1 is they want to make it required. It's no longer optional. They want it to be required, and they've achieved that in California. Number 2, they want to lower the age of sex education. Most of us think about sex ed hitting around high school age, that's the appropriate time to start talking to kids about sex ed, but they want to lower it all the way down to kindergarten. They accomplished that in California. And number 3, they want to affirm alternative sexual behaviors like homosexuality and transgenderism. So what people of parenting age think of as sex education from the past is no longer the case. That's not what their kids are learning. They're learning a new version of comprehensive sex ed that is far more radical and dangerous than they could really even imagine. And we're going to give them some examples today that I think are going to shock them.
Yeah. أنا سألتها بقول لها في حد ممكن يقول بمنتهى البساطة الأولاد بتوعنا هيتعلموا عن الجنس وهيتعلموا بدري، لأنه المجتمع اللي هنا مجتمع مفتوح والأولاد معرضين لكل حاجة، فمن الأفضل إن احنا نعلمهم في المدرسة بدل ما يتعلموه هم بيلعبوا في اوضه اللعب ولا بيقعدوا مع بعض في الفسحه وبيلعبوا مع بعض والاولاد يكلموا بعض ويقولوا كلام مش صحيح. فقالت لي المبدا ده ممكن يكون مبدا سليم لو يعلموهم الحاجه الصح، لكن في 3 حاجات بتميز البرنامج اللي بيعلم دلوقتي اللي عشان كده هو غلط. اول حاجه انه بقى required، يعني مطلوب، يعني حاجه لازم الاولاد ياخدوها. قبل كده كان اوبشنال وممكن تاخده ممكن ما تاخدوش، دلوقتي بقى لازم البرنامج ده يتدرس في المدرسة. دي أول حاجة. تاني حاجة انهم وطوا السن اللي يعلموه فيه. زمان كان بيبقى في الهاي سكول وقت الثانوي تقريبا يبتدوا يتعلموا على حاجة زي كده. دلوقتي عاوزين يوصلوها. Did you say to the kindergarten now that they...
It can go in California and in many states all the way down to kindergarten.
في كاليفورنيا هنا وفي بعض الولايات التانية لغاية سن الكيندرجارتن اللي هو that would be 5 years old, 6 years old?
6 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
لغاية سن 6، عاوزين من سن 6 سنين يبتدوا يعلموهم الكلام. وده على فكرة مانداتوري موجود هنا في كاليفورنيا. احنا مش بنقول هذا الكلام على ولاية تانية، ده موجود لغاية دلوقتي. الحاجة الثالثة بقى اللي ابتدوا يعلموهم اللي يسموها alternative sex، يعني الطرق الأخرى اللي يمارس بها الجنس اللي مش العلاقة الطبيعية اللي هي بين الراجل والست، لا ابتدوا يعلموهم بقى على العلاقة يعني علاقة بين راجل وراجل أو ست وست، أو حتى علاقة شاذة في ممارسة العلاقة الجسدية نفسها، وهنكلمكم أكتر على هذا الأمر. دول الثلاث حاجات اللي اتغيروا واللي خلونا دلوقتي بنرفض المبدأ الموجود. That's why we're rejecting this principle.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because while it was easier for parents to, like you said, if a parent wanted to send their child to sex education in the past, the idea that they had that, okay, my child will they'll learn abstinence, and then alternatively they'll learn how to protect themselves. It's just not the case anymore. So we need to open people's eyes to what it really looks like, because if we don't get to our children to the conversation first, the schools will, and our kids will get a distorted view of sexuality.
That's frightening. Let's get into it, Abby,
Yeah.
and tell us a little bit about what exactly is a program that's presenting to the kids nowadays.
All right. Well, I described it as comprehensive sex education, and the state requires it to be age appropriate and medically accurate. But I can tell you, because I've seen the curriculum, it is not age appropriate. There's no one that I've met, no matter what you believe, that thinks a 6-year-old should be talking to their teacher about sex, homosexuality, sex acts, and yet that's what the law provides. Medically accurate information. The curriculum, because they have required us to affirm, meaning saying it is good to do homosexual activities and alternative sexual activities, that's no longer medically accurate. So I can't tell a student that it's riskier to participate in homosexual behavior, even though medically it is riskier, because that would reflect negatively on a homosexual. So you see, I'm actually prevented from telling you the truth.
Let me make sure we understand that correctly. So هي بتقول, I'm going to translate that so we can say, but I want to follow on this important point. بتقول انه حطوا 2 requirements عشان فيها هيكون اكتر من كده. اول حاجه انه لازم يكون البرنامج ده يناسب السن اللي بنكلمهم، age appropriate، يعني يناسب السن اللي بيتكلموا فيها. وبتقول ان ده مش صحيح، لانه ازاي ده مناسب لولد سنه 6 سنين او بنت سنها 6 سنين احنا هنكلمها على الجنس والعلاقه الجنسيه. دي اول نقطه بتعترض عليها. تاني حاجه الريكوايرمنت بتاع البروجرام ده انه يكون ميديكالي اكيوريت، يعني يدي معلومات طبيه سليمه. وهي بتقول لكن لما الطريقه اللي بيدرسوا بيها هم بيدرسوا ويقولوا مثلا العلاقات المثليه بينهم وبعض دي ما هياش يعني بتسبب مشاكل اكتر من العلاقات الطبيعيه. ما يقدروش يقولوا كده، لانهم عاوزين يحطوا العلاقه المثليه كانها حاجه طبيعيه ومقبوله. فبتقول ده مش ميديكالي اكيوريت، لانه الحاجات الطبيه بتقول انه العلاقات بين المثليه ليها مشاكل اكتر طبيا عن العلاقات الطبيعيه. فالاثنين الحاجتين دول مش مظبوطين. Both these principles are not met here in this program as it's presented right now.
Correct. They're not. I mean, the law says that you have to be that, but what they're providing is
totally
not.
different.
Yeah, totally different.
And how do they justify that in the minds of anybody? How can they justify educating kids at the age of 6 about sex?
That's a really hard question, because to get in the mind of somebody who thinks it's appropriate is a challenge, but maybe this is helpful. If you look at the organizations that supported the laws that put these sex education programs into place, it's Planned Parenthood is behind it. The Equality California, which is a gay and lesbian alliance. They want to promote homosexuality in the schools. And a group called SECUS, Sex Education for Cultural Change. So these three groups and many more. I can't tell you why any normal person with children would want their kids exposed to this, but these groups have an agenda. They want kids to be sexualized at a young age. They want them to accept homosexuality and alternative sexuality behaviors. And Planned Parenthood, for example, wants children to become impregnated at a young age so they can become customers. So that's why we have the programs, because there's a lot of money and powerful people who pushed this, not parents. Like I said, I've shared this with many people, and when I show parents what's in the curriculum, I have not met anyone left, right, or center who would approve. But the organizations want it.
فهي أبي بتقول إنه لما أنا بسألها يعني إزاي أي حد يفكر إنه عقليا ممكن يقدم الصورة دي إن إحنا نكلم الأولاد في السن الصغير ده على العلاقات الجنسية وكمان نكلمهم على العلاقات الشاذة دي في نظرنا إحنا هي علاقات شاذة. فبتقول لي لأنه الناس اللي واقفين ورا الحاجات دي كلهم لهم فايدة من كده. كلهم يا إما gays and lesbian organization، يا إما ناس بيعملوا planned parenthood، يعني لما البنات يبقوا يكونوا حامل وهم ينزلوا الولد، أو يعني هيستفيدوا ماديا من الأمور دي كلها. فكل الهيئات اللي معاها فلوس اللي بتعضد الفكرة دي هيئات ليها مصالح في تعضيد الفكرة دي، إنه العلاقات الجنسية تبتدي في السن بدري فهم يعملوا فلوس.
Could I interject? One of the ironies is that gays and lesbian couples don't produce children.
There you
and
go.
Planned Parenthood aborts children. So the people who are not producing children and are not in favor of lifestyles that produce children as a normal marriage does are the ones who are controlling the sex education of children. Very strange.
Very mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I cannot comprehend that. And thanks for bringing up this point. I think most of the people wanted to more or less, now we're presenting the picture to them, but they want to know, I mean, what's this all about? Why are you guys so against it? What exactly are they teaching our children?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I have 4 children, so I've got skin in the game, as they say. I care about this because I had kids all the way from elementary school through college age. And because of that, it was unavoidable. I had to go look at the curriculum. So when I saw the law changing in California, I became aware that the curriculum was going to change, so I asked to see the curriculum. And very quickly I realized they didn't want me to see the curriculum, and I was prevented from doing so. And my personality, that just made me more determined to go figure it out. So I gathered with some other parents who were like-minded, and originally, Doctor, we just wanted to see it. Just show us what you're teaching the kids. And that was so difficult that it made me really question, what are they doing in this classroom that they are so unwilling to tell me and just show me what it is so I can make up my mind. And then I saw what it was.
You went actually to the school board?
I sat down with a dozen of the top Los Angeles Unified School District executives. It was me, a couple parents, and a room filled after we had kind of stirred it up a little bit. And they sat across from me and told me what the curriculum was. And it was a eye-opening meeting.
أبي بتقول لأنها أم ال4 أولاد فهي ليها اهتمام بالموضوع ده، فهي لما عرفت كده قالت أنا عاوز أشوف إيه الكوريكولم اللي بيدوه الأولاد، فراحت للسكول ديستريكت LA يونيفايد اللي هم مش عارف سميها بالعربي وزارة التعليم هنا في المنطقة، وقالت لهم أنا عاوزكم توروني إيه الكوريكولم أو إيه المنهج اللي بتدرسوه للأولاد. فهي كانت موجودة هي و2 3 في أوضة مليانة من الناس، the school district in the beginning they wouldn't show you.
Well, they smiled and they said, sure, and then they brought me the curriculum at this meeting.
Okay.
But this is what happened, Doctor. I did my homework ahead of time, and I won't show the pictures, but I had copies of the curriculum already, which I had found on the internet and I'd found with other teachers that I knew. And so when they brought the curriculum and they were presenting it, I had to stop them and I showed them a picture and said, is this in your curriculum? They said, yes. I said, did you bring this here today? And they said, no. I said, well, why didn't you bring it? I was very clear. I had the backing of an attorney saying, I have the right to see the material. You said you'd bring it all to me, but you didn't. Why didn't you bring this particular page? And the room, their faces just dropped. And I went page by page. Did you bring this? Did you bring this? Are these materials you used in your classroom? Yes. Did you bring it here? No. So they were hiding it. And that's when I knew that we had a real problem. And so I confirmed that the materials that I found were in the curriculum, and I decided that parents needed to know. And that's when a group of parents and myself created a forum to let parents know what was happening in the classroom.
Amazing. بتقول آبي إنها راحت في الاجتماع ده وكل المسؤولين الكبار هناك بتاعهم قالت لهم ادوني الكوريكولم، جابوا لها الكوريكولم بابتسامة ووروه لها. فهي بتقول إن هي كانت محضرة نفسها وجايبة معاها بعض الصور من اللي موجود في الكوريكولم ده أو المنهج اللي موجود. ما لقيتش الحاجات دي موجودة في المنهج اللي قدموا لها، فمسكتهم واحدة ورا واحدة تقول لهم الصورة دي موجودة عندكم؟ قالوا لها قالت لهم طيب ما جبتوهاش ليه؟ سكتوا. عندها 5 أو 6 صور. I know the pictures are so graphic that I cannot even show them to the parents on TV, but I want to describe a couple of them so people can get the idea of what's being taught to a 6 or a 10 years old.
Yeah.
And some of those pictures I'm not going to even ask you to show. I would love to show, but here's what they showed. There is a picture, and I saw this and I was shocked. A picture showing actually the sexual organs of a male and a female. يعني هم وروا صورة، وأنا لازم أقول هذا الكلام في التلفزيون عشان الناس تعرف، رغم إن أنا ما أقدرش أوريكم الصورة. يعني لهذه الدرجة الصورة أنت كأب وأم ما تقدرش تشوفها، لكن ابنك بيشوفها. Your son or daughter is exposed to that, yet I cannot show it to you. مورية الأعضاء الجنسية للراجل، وصورة تانية مورية بكل وضوح الأعضاء الجنسية للمرأة. وصورة ثالثة بتوري إيه العلاقات اللي ممكن تكون بين الراجل والست. حاجة يعني غريبة خالص. منها العلاقات المثالية، منها مثلا اللي بيسموه الأورال سكس أو عبارة استعمال الفم في الجنس، أو حاجات تانية إيفن ما أقدرش أقول اسمها. يعني لهذه الدرجة هم بيوروا الحاجات دي للأولاد في السن الصغير. حاجة غريبة. الجراف اللي أنا شفته اللي موري العلاقة بين الراجل والست وموري كل علاقة ممكنة، دي حاجة مزعجة جدا. دي حاجة ما نشوفهاش غير في أفلام الإباحية. ما نشوفش الكلام ده غير في الأفلام الإباحية. مش ممكن تشوفها في علاقة طبيعية بين راجل وست. إزاي يدرسوها لأولادنا؟ How is it that they can teach that to our children?
Well, it's embarrassing for me to have these. We had them showing earlier. I had to flip them over. I wanted to point out one. You probably described it, but the pictures of the male and the female anatomy in the textbooks from when I was a student, they were front-facing and they showed reproductive organs, so that a student would know, how a baby is made, where the baby grows, what are the fallopian tube, the uterus, the things that a person needs to know about reproduction. What the difference is in the picture that you're describing is that the female's body is exposed, and if you look carefully at what they identify, they don't identify fallopian tubes and reproductive organs. They identify sexual parts of their body. They identify the vulva, the clitoris, the sexual organs. So the difference between teaching people anatomy so that they understand how their body functions properly versus identifying the parts of the body that are pleasure-based is the best example I can provide for parents. They are no longer teaching health, they are teaching pleasure. Where are the pleasure zones? And that is clearly not what parents think their kids are going to learn in school.
بتقول آبي إنه الصور اللي موجودة هنا، الطريقة اللي بتعرض بيها مش مثلا صورة علمية بتدرس العلم. يعني ممكن جدا أنا فاكر في الثانوي لما كنا في مصر في الثانوي، أو لما دخلت الجامعة وخدنا مثلا تشريح الجسم، شفنا الصور دي بس بطريقة علمية. يعني في Grey's Anatomy، اللي منكم دكاترة يفتكروا Grey's Anatomy، and in Grey's Anatomy there is في picture showing الأعضاء لكن بيوروا إيه؟ بيوروا مثلا الأعضاء بتاعة الإنجاب، وبيوروا مثلا الفلوبيان تيوبز، بيوروا اليوترس، بيوروا الحاجات دي اللي بتشرح للناس ازاي الطفل مثلا بينجب، شيء تعليمي. لكن الصور اللي موجودة اللي بتوري للأولاد ما بتوريش الكلام ده كله. كل اللي بتوريه المناطق اللي يحدث فيها الإثارة بس، مش الإنجاب والتعليم. ففي النهاية يعني هم بيعلموا الأولاد ازاي يحصل الإثارة، إنما مش بيعلموا الأولاد ازاي الإنجاب أو تعليم سليم يؤدي الأولاد يفهموا فهم كويس، يبقوا عارفين ويمتنعوا عن هذه الأمور لما يجي الوقت المناسب. إنما تعليم خاطئ جدا بيدعو إلى ممارسة الجنس في سن صغير. I just explained what you said.
I'm blushing and I don't even know what you said.
Many parents have tried to do what Abby did and present this information to school boards. So they go to a public school board meeting, and during public comment period, they try to read to them what are in these books. They try to show pictures, and the school boards won't let them because it's pornographic, and they won't allow it. And people have tried to testify before Congress. And the congressional committee says you can't testify and you can't put it into the congressional record because it's pornographic. And yet it's being given to elementary school kids.
Oh my God. يعني ديفيد بيقول انه في ناس حاولوا يروحوا للسكول ديستريكت ويتكلموا، قالوا لهم لا ما نقدرش نتكلم، دي صور اباحيه. وحتى راحوا قدام الكونجرس عشان يتكلموا، الكونجرس قال ما نقدرش ندخل ده في الريكورد بتاعنا لان دي صور اباحيه. صور إباحية بالنسبة للكونجرس والسكول ديستريكت، لكن أولادنا ممكن يشوفوها. أمر مزعج جدا. That's pretty much the part that annoys you about the curriculum.
A lot of it bothers me. I mean,
Tell me more.
A lot of it bothers me. I'll tell you, so we talked earlier about how it used to be optional. That means that the school districts, different school districts could decide, do we want to have sex ed in our community? That gives parents a lot of control because at a smaller level, you can say, yes, we want this, no, we don't. Now, because it's mandatory in California, for example, in 5th grade, 7th grade, and 9th grade, every parent has to confront this question of how they want to handle sex ed. It's not optional. It's going to be in your schools. And what happens in California is normally replicated across the country.
Okay. So الجزء الثاني بداية انه بقى mandatory، بقى لازم انت كل طفل في الفيفث جريد او السيفنث جريد او الناينث جريد لازم يواجه السؤال ده في sex education، وابنك لازم ياخدها. Now, when you said mandatory, it's mandatory to teach it, or they have to receive it?
Mandatory that the school has to provide sex education for the students at those grade levels. But I'm glad you brought that up because it is not mandatory for the student to be present. The parents can opt them out.
That's good to know.
It's very good. And I'd like to talk more about that.
Let's talk about that because a lot of people didn't know that. As a matter of fact, I was myself under the impression that this is mandatory and you cannot even object to it. All what you can do is just talk to the kid after, which is normally doesn't work. But tell us, it's actually optional too.
Well, you asked earlier, you know, parents who are concerned that if I don't let my kids go to sex ed, maybe they won't know what they need to know to be a successful, healthy adult. You asked me that earlier.
Yeah.
And I will just point out that I was opted out of sex ed. When I was a student, I have 4 kids, I figured it out, okay? So your kids will be okay. They'll figure out how to have sex properly without this bad education. So that's my little joke there. Yeah. But it's not just that it's mandatory at those grade levels. It's also in many places, including California, legally, it's been included all the way down to kindergarten optionally, but it's being also incorporated into history, social studies, and other kinds of curricula. So maybe we can talk about that later, but it's so much harder for parents to identify when that education is happening. But in those grade levels, if you have a student in 5th, 7th, and 9th, what you need to do is opt out. That means remove your student from the classroom for the period of sex education. And it's usually a single day in 5th grade, and in 7th grade, it's a 3-week curriculum. In high school, it's a 3 to 6 week curriculum. And there are laws that protect the parents and protect the students against any retaliation. They won't get a bad grade, they won't fail out of school, but they will miss out on some of these delightful pages, which I highly recommend.
So أبي بتقول إنه من حق أي واحد ولاده في الفيفث ولا السيفن والناينث إنه يعمل حاجة اسمها opt out، يعني يقول أنا مش عاوز أولادي ياخدوا الكلاس ده، وفي ورقة لازم يملاها بس يحصل في بداية السكول ويملاها ويقول لأولاد إن هم ما ياخدوهاش، وفي قوانين بتحمي الأولاد من إنه حد يعني يعاقبهم عشان حاجة زي كده، فالأولاد مش هيخسروا أي حاجة بتقول بتريقة غير الحاجات دي الصور الغريبة اللي هيتعرضوا ليها. Now, when you say opt out, do they have to fill out a form or how do you do it?
I'm glad you asked. So all they have to do is write a letter, put it in writing, and give it to the principal and send a copy to the district. And then, of course, let your teacher know. My dad can probably talk more about the legal. There are forms available, and I think we're going to share some websites where people can just fill out the form. If that's easier for them, that's fine. But you can just have a handwritten note, and that's what I've done with my kids. I want my student excused from sex education, and it's done.
بس جواب تكتبه وتبعته للمدير وتبعته للديستريكت، يعني الديستريكت اللي فيه الأولاد، وتقول للتيتشر أنا مش عاوز ابني أو بنتي. ديفيد هيقول لنا على بعض الحاجات ازاي نعملها، بس قبل ما نعمل كده اعتقد انه في سؤال. مين معنا على التليفون؟ We have a question on the line. Michael, go ahead.
الو، مساء الخير.
اهلا، مساء الخير.
انا متشكر جدا على البرنامج الجميل ده وحاجه مفيده جدا، واحنا لازم فعلا يعني نزود الوعي عند الناس. بس يعني انا متشائم شويه لاني شايف ان هم بيعملوا كل حاجه صح، ليهم اجنده زي ما هي قالت، بس احنا في المقابل ما بنعملش اي حاجه. فانا عايز اسالهم، يعني هو الحرب بتبقى في ناحيه التعليم والمدارس والميديا، ايه اللي المفروض احنا كاهالي او كمؤسسات نعمله بالنسبه للتعليم وبالنسبه للميديا، زي يعني نحارب زي ما هم بيحاربونا؟
اشكرك، سؤال ممتاز، اشكرك يا مايكل.
ده سؤال. وفي سؤال تاني، هل هي ممكن تبقى منداتوري على المدارس الخاصه ولا لا؟
اوكي، ده سؤال ممتاز كمان. حاضر، هنتكلم عن النقطه دي، هنتكلم عليها. شكرا يا مايكل، اشكرك على سؤالينك الممتازين. Well, Michael is listening, and I say first thank you very much. It's a very important topic, and thanks for educating us. But he says he's kind of optimistic because it seems like they are very well organized and they have the resources, and we don't seem to be able to counter the action. He says he had two questions. First question is, what should we as parents and as religious organizations do or can do? And maybe David, you can tackle that. And the other one is, his question was, does that apply to private schools?
Oh, that's a great question. No, private schools do not have to follow the California education codes with regard to sex ed. So that one's easy.
Okay. ده إجابة السؤال الثاني يا مايكل، إنه لا، البرايفت سكولز مش لازم يعملوا السكس education ومش بيقدموه. وأنا في قبل البرنامج ما يخلص هكلمكم على مدرسة عندنا هنا في الكنيسة بتاع سانت أثناسيوس اسمها سانت ميري سكول، بتدي كوريكولم للأولاد لغاية الفيفث جريد، وطبعا بالتأكيد ما بيدرسوش الحاجات دي، أو إذا كانوا بيتكلموا عنها بيتكلموا بالطريقة الصحيحة. ده السؤال الثاني. Now, I want everybody to learn more about the process by which they can opt out. If you can elaborate a little bit more on that, David.
In California, it's fairly typical to other states as well, but there are two different kinds of opt-out provisions. The primary one, the first one that you do, is under what's called the California Healthy Youth Act, which is the comprehensive sex education program in the public schools in California. And it specifically says that parents can, in writing, notify the school that they want their child to be excused from participation in all California Healthy Youth Act health education programs. And the school is obligated not only to excuse the child and told specifically you cannot involve a child who's been opted out. You can't work your way around it, and include the child. Not only that, but the school has to provide an alternative educational component. So they're not just sitting doing nothing during that time. They have to provide something else that's educationally appropriate for them to do. So that's the first thing. And the more parents exercise that, the more it becomes clear to schools and school districts that parents object to this. So it might seem like a small thing, you're objecting for your child, but you're actually voicing an opinion which is part of the community and part of the Christian community, saying, we don't agree with this. We will take care of these issues at home and in our own way and through the churches or whatever, but we don't like the way that you teach these topics. They're corrupting the morality in the minds of our children. And that message is delivered to the school, to the teacher, and to the whole system every time a parent exercises this first step of opting out of comprehensive sex education.
Very good point. ديفيد بيقول انه الاسم يعني البرنامج اللي تحتيه عمله السكس education اسمه Healthy Use Act. And the Healthy Use Act هو عن طريقه بيدرسوا السكس education. فانت بتكتب جواب لمديرة المدرسة او مدير المدرسة وتقول له انا عاوز excuse my children انهم ياخدوا الكوريكولم بتاع الهيلثي يوز اكت هيلثي يوز اكت وساعتها يبقى لازم يمنعوا مش بس كمان هيخلوهمش يحضروا لكن لازم يدوا حاجه ثانيه. You said they have to provide an alternative. Meaning what? Meaning they're going to take them to a separate class or what's going to happen in reality?
The law says nothing about what that alternative should be. It's simply, the idea is if they wanted to get around the problem that had occurred in the past, where students were simply sent to a study hall and the students would do nothing. They'd, they'd play with their electronic devices or whatever and waste their time. So the school has to do something, but there's no law describing what that something is. It just can't be the sex education. Then there's a second form of opt-out, which is much more targeted to Christians and religious and moral people, and that is there's a special section in the California law which says if any part of the curriculum of health, the health curriculum in the public schools, conflicts with the parents' religious beliefs or their moral principles, they can opt out the student from that. So obviously the sex education parts are very likely to conflict with those religious and moral principles. But as Abby says, the proponents of sex education have tried to infiltrate all other areas. So history and social science and literature and virtually every area, they try to move these topics into that area. But this statute, this other opt-out statute, says any part of the curriculum, if it violates your religious beliefs or your moral standards, you can opt your child out of it. So it's a very, very powerful tool. It's just that it takes a little effort on the part of parents to adequately notify the school of what they're opting out of. So that takes a little explanation.
Okay, so ديفيد بيقول قال نقطتين مهمين. أول نقطة إن أنت ممكن ببساطة زي ما قلنا في الأول تكتب الجواب للناظر والناظرة وتقول لهم إنه أنا عاوز ابني يطلع من البرنامج ده من غير حتى ما تبدي. So in the first case scenario you really don't have to give a reason. You just say I want them opt out. I don't want them to get this. لكن في النقطة الثانية بيقول إنه في قانون بيقول إنك أنت لو في أي حاجة بيدرسوها لأولادك ضد العقائد بتاعتك انت your religious beliefs لو ضدها من حقك تبعت وتقول لهم انا مش عاوز ابني يتعرض للحاجات دي في اي حاجه في الكوريكولم. السبب انه قال كده انه ابي قالت لنا انه مش بس هم بيعلموا الاولاد السكس المواضيع الحاجات دي اللي اتكلمنا عليها في النص ساعه ولا 3/4 ساعه، انما بيحاولوا يدخلوا الحاجات دي في كل المناهج. بيحاولوا يدخلوها في like in biology they wanted to put it in every aspect of the
It's
curriculum.
more often in history and social studies.
History and
Because
social
of because of something called the FAIR Act. It was passed in 2011. It requires that the contributions of homosexuals, bisexuals, and transsexuals be included in social studies. So because they are required to teach about them, they go into those textbooks. So you'll often find it in your history and social studies, especially at elementary levels.
خلفية تاريخية بتقول أبي إنه في سنة 2011 طلع حاجة اسمها the Fair Act. الفير أكت ده كان الهدف منه إنه الناس تعرف على المساهمات بتاعة الناس المثاليين الهوموسيكشوالز والحاجات دي المثاليين مساهماتهم في المجتمع. يعني هم عاوزين المجتمع يقبلهم. فطلعوا الأكت ده وبسبب هذا اتقالت بقى دلوقتي لقينا نشوف كلام كتير على الحاجات دي في الهيستوري في السوشيال ستاديز في الحاجات دي كلها غير بقى السكس اديوكيشن تلاقيها كمان في الحاجات دي. فده اللي بيقول. وديفيد قال برضو نقطة مهمة بيقول كل مرة واحد بيبعت جواب للمدرسة ويقول أنا مش عاوز ابني يخش انت كمان مش بس بتحفظ على ابنائك انت بتعمل ستيتمنت انت بتقول للناس دول ان انا مش موافق على الطريقة اللي بتعملوها دي وان التعليم السكس بالطريقة الجرافيك دي للأولاد حاجة أنا ما أقبلهاش ومش مقبولة للمجتمع. عشان كده you're encouraging people to do more of that because that will make a statement against this to the school boards.
Yes, there's also a California law which wasn't honored in Abby's case, but a California law which says that a parent has the right to see every textbook, teacher's manual, audiovisual aid, every instructional device that's being used in a course. The parent has a right to see that before the course begins. And so you can look through the social science, look through the history, look through the literature, and see where these topics about homosexuality and lesbianism and transgender and related topics and have been brought into the other areas of the curriculum so that you can notify the school properly. This is the part, when they teach this part of this textbook or this part of the curriculum, I want my student to be given given the alternative. I want them to be opted out of this. But it takes some effort on the part of parents, or better, a group of parents dividing up the job. So one parent takes the social studies, one parent takes the biology, one parent takes the history, one parent takes the literature, and another parent takes the library, and they look at what can be done and inform each other so they can adequately notify the school. The school can't opt your child out if they don't know precisely what it is you want to opt out from. So it takes some effort on the parts of parents. But again, when the parents put in that effort, they're also standing up for their faith. They are witnessing for their faith to the government and to their schools. So there are two benefits. You benefit the children, but you also benefit by letting the school and the public know that there are people here who have a completely different worldview from the secular worldview that they're trying to put in the schools.
ديفيد بيقول انه كمان في قانون بيقول ان من حقك كأب انك تشوف كل حاجة بتدرس لأولادك، أب أو أم طبعا بتدرس لأولادك. وعشان كده اللي عملوه مع أبي لما ما مروهاش الكوريكلم بالكامل ده كان ضد القوانين دي. فهو بيقول انه لازم نمارس حقوقنا. فهو بيدعو مثلا انه الاهالي، الموضوع ده هياخد وقت، انه الاهالي مثلا يعملوا مجموعه من الاهالي كل واحد يدرس جزء الكتاب ده، اللي يروح اللايبرري، اللي يروح كل ماده من المواد ويشوف اذا كان في حاجات موجوده في المنهج ما تمشيش مع المبادئ اللي هو يؤمن بيها. فبيقول يعني انه دي الطريقه اللي الامور بتمشي بيها هنا في امريكا، انه تعمل جماعات ضغط، يعني نعمل جماعات ضغط على السكول ديستريكت وعلى المسؤولين هنا في المدينة أو في الولاية، نوريهم إنه الحاجات دي مش صح. دي عاوزة مجهود، مجموعة من الناس تاخد على عاتقها هذا الأمر من الأهالي. وبالطريقة دي قال كلمة حلوة خالص، قال لك you witness to your faith، يعني أنت بتعبر عن إيمانك وعقيدتك، وإنه أنا مسيحي متمسك بمسيحيتي ومش هخضع تسلط المجتمع علينا كمسيحيين. You know, you brought this up, Jen. I recall, which I attend a Bible study, the BSF, you probably hear about it, and quite often, every now and then, we cannot talk about politics, but every now and then the men will chat about it, and I recall one time that I stood angrily, and I told them, you know, we are a majority in this country. Actually, the believers here are a majority, but we're like the silent majority because we really don't get our voice heard. We talk about it amongst ourselves, but we do not come out and act upon it. And that's why we're stepped on. And
And it's not just the religious minority. Christianity has been dwindling slowly and losing its influence in our country. But most of the people who are not Christians are still have a Christian worldview. They still understand right and wrong, good and evil, and even sin. And they know that it's only a small percentage at the very top who actually believe in all of this progressive, woke, gay, lesbian worldview. But they're in power, but they are not in numbers. And many people who aren't even Christians will stand up for morality when the Christians stand up for their Christian faith. And it's part of the witnessing to the broader culture, too. We're not very likely to convert very many of these progressive, woke, gay and lesbian people, but we are likely to convert a fair number of people to faith who are in that moral crowd when they see that the strength of morality comes from knowing God.
Amen. يعني الحقيقة ديفيد بيقول حاجة كويسة خالص. بيقول احنا اللي نقدر نعمله ان احنا نقدم مثال للناس. كل الناس عارفين ايه الصح والغلط. كل الناس حتى اللي ما يؤمنوش بالمسيحية عارفين الصح والغلط من خلال المبادئ المسيحية. المبادئ المسيحية هي أساس كل قوانين في العالم. فلذلك بيقول احنا لما نقدم مثال كويس ليهم ونقف على حقوقنا زي ما نتكلم هنا. موضوع السكس اديوكيشن ده نوع واحد من الحاجات، لكن بيتكلم على كل حاجة تانية. يبقى احنا ربما ما نغيرش حد من المثليين مثلا، دي حاجة خاصة بيهم، لكن ربما نقدر نجيب ناس أكتر للإيمان الحقيقي وللمسيح. Allow me to take another phone call if it's okay with you. Alan Christiana, تفضلي.
Hi, I actually wanted to say thank you so much for your guests to make an appearance in your show. This is such helpful information and it's very vital for every parent out there today. And I wish, and I'm requesting this, that this show can be aired like throughout all of next week, day and night, because parents need to be educated. They need to know exactly what's happening to their children within, the grounds of the school. I just wanted to ask a favor. If we can have the verbatim of the letter that we should be typing out to the school district, opting our children out of that curriculum, preferably the second option where this material is being targeted in social studies and history. I just feel that not having the background in like law or what our rights are as parents, it really would be helpful if we can just have a standard form of the letter that we need to communicate to the principal and to the school district of what exactly we are requesting and what the consequences will be if this is not followed. Thank you so much for your time. God bless.
Thank you, Christiana. I appreciate very much the question. Okay, is that possible that we could have a letter written and we can post it on our website for everybody to have it?
I'll start. There's two websites which you can share. One is Let Parents Decide. They have an opt-out form there, and I believe it's the Pacific
Justice
Institute.
It's on the screen. Do you see that?
Yeah. So you can find one there, and then there's Pacific Justice Institute, which also has a form that you can just fill in and print out and send to your school. But as she mentioned, that's for the first option for sex ed. It's a more it's a compartmentalized program. You can step out and step in. For the second part, it's harder because you're going to need to identify the topics that you want your student removed from. And that is much trickier. I don't know if you have any input on how to phrase that.
And it obviously takes research to find out what these textbooks are saying or what the optional additional reading that the teacher is applying, what it actually says. Someone has to go look at it. And they're trusting that parents won't care or won't have the time. Parents are busy earning a living, taking care of their families. And so getting a group of people together to share the load and making sure that you're actually getting accurate information is helpful. By the way, there's a statute in California also which says parents have the right to attend any class or activity that their child is involved in. Now, there are some procedural elements as to how you go about doing that, but you're allowed to go there and sit in or stand in the class and watch what the teacher does. And I strongly suspect that if a dozen concerned parents, and particularly Christian parents, stood in the back of a classroom and just not interfered, but just paid attention and paid close attention to what's actually going on, that's part of the witness too, and it certainly gives them firsthand information as to what's actually happening. They don't have to depend on someone telling them what's going on.
Wonderful. Let me reiterate that again. خليني أترجم للناس ربما اللي سمعنا اللي محتاجين يفهموا. كريستيانا اللي كانت بتتكلم بتقول اكتبوا لنا الجواب ده بحيث ان احنا نقدر ناخده من حته وننقله على طول. فالرد عليها من ابي قالت انه في 2 ويب سايت، ومن فضلك جيب الويب سايت مره ثانيه حطها على السكرين. شوفوا ال2 ويب سايت ده، اكتبوهم او خد صوره للسكرين قدامك عشان تقدر take a photo so you can know exactly those websites. If they go to this website, there's a form that's easy to
let
fill
parents
out.
decide. You'll see it right there on the main page. Opt out. You click on it, and it'll go to the form. I do want to clarify what he was saying. For the type of education that's embedded into history and social studies, what you need to do as a parent is go to the teacher, ask them to receive the textbook, look at the textbook, mark the chapters that have the objectionable material, return it to them with a note that says, I want my student removed from the classroom when you discuss this. I did this in first grade. I was aware that they got new textbooks. I took the book home, flipped through it, marked several pages, went to my teacher, and I said, I don't want my student to participate in the lessons from chapter X, Y, and Z.
Let me just interrupt, because I have a question about this, because I want to make sure that people understand. What exactly did you see that make you feel this way?
Yeah.
Was it a graphic language? What was it?
Well, we talked about sex ed earlier. That's its other thing. When I went, this is first grade, so my son was 7 years old. They got new textbooks. I took it home and looked at it. What I was looking for was their descriptions of family. That's where you find it most often. So when I went to the page about what is a family, it talked about homosexual families. When it talked about self-esteem, it talked about accepting yourself if you're gay, lesbian, or transgender. So I marked those pages. Now, I had a great experience. So I want people like your caller not to be discouraged or intimidated, because I went to my teacher, I showed her the new textbook, and she said, whoa, I didn't even know that was in there. Wow. I'm not going to teach it. These teachers don't want to teach this either. And now, I can't say that for all teachers. You need, that's why it's really important that parents do what he said. Show up at the classroom, talk to your teacher, tell them what you want, what your family cares about. Many times you might find somebody who agrees with you, and they're relieved to know that you don't want your student to know about that. So in that case, the teacher said, I'm simply going to skip that chapter for the kids. Now, I still said, it's still in your textbook, and my son's going to flip through the page one day and they might see this. And we talked about it and agreed that if a question came up from a student about this topic, like what is gay marriage, for example, she would simply say to my 7-year-old again, you can go home and ask your mom and dad about that. And that was satisfactory to me, because that's what I want. I don't want the teacher having the conversation. She didn't want to have the conversation either. I want to talk to my student about it. And I hope we talk about that, because talking to your kids at home is the best way to proactively solve this problem. That was a lot. I'm sorry.
I was going to get to that.
Yeah.
I was going to get to what's the alternative. But let's emphasize the very good points that you both are making. بتقول أبي تجربة شخصية ليها إنها لما ابنها كان سنه 7 سنين جالها الكتب، فبصت في كتاب لقيت جزء منه ما استريحتلوش بيتكلم على المثاليين، زواج المثاليين، وإيه هي الأسرة، وممكن المثاليين يكونوا جزء من الأسرة. هي ما استريحتش الكلام ده، فراحت للمدرسة وقالت لها أنا مش عاوز الجزء ده يتدرس لابني. المدرسة شافت الحاجات، قال ده الكلام ده أنا مش هدرسه للأولاد كلهم. فقالت لها طيب ما ممكن حد يسألك سؤال؟ فقالت في الحل زي دي ترجعها تاني للأب أو الأم وتقول لهم هم يكلموهم على الحاجات دي. طبعا لما بقول كلمة مثاليين أقصد الهوموسيكشوال، يعني ده المثالية اللي اسمها كده باللغة العربية، المثليين. طيب صلحوها لي أنا نطقتها غلط، المثليين. أوكي. الحاجة التانية اللي قالها ديفيد، قال إن أنت من حقك تروح المدرسة، من حقك تشوف أي درس بياخده ابنك في المدرسة. He can do that even up to high school. They can go and attend the classes, David?
That's what the statute says.
The statute says that does not put a limit on the age.
The school obviously has to schedule it. So you're going to get, potentially, some schools will be helpful, some schools will be less than helpful, and might make it difficult to schedule it. But the law says you're allowed to do this, so they are obligated to do it, and it's not limited by age level.
أي واحد يقدر يروح لأي كلاس حتى لغاية الهاي سكول وتحضر الدرس اللي بيقوله. طبعا يعني يمكن في الهاي سكول الأب أو الولد أو البنت مش هيبقى مبسوط، لكن يمكن في الجزء الأولاني هو اللي بيقوله ديفيد إنه لو إن الأهالي بيروحوا ويوقفوا، ربما حتى الطريقة المدرس هيشرح بيها الأمور هتختلف طبعا، لكن النقطة اللي بيقولها إن إحنا لازم نبتدي نبقى أكتف. لو إحنا فعلا عاوزين نحمي أولادنا، ادي كذا طريقه اتقدمت لكم دلوقتي. اول طريقه الويب سايت اللي وريناكم، and we just posted that on our Facebook now, so if you go to the Facebook page بتاع القناه هتلاقوا الويب سايت دي موجوده، ولما كليك عليها في كليك اون ات على طول تخش اللينك على طول موجود في الكومنت، وتقدروا تعملوا الحكايه دي اول طريقه. الطريقه الثانيه زي ما اقترحوا ان احنا نحاول نرتب مجموعة من الناس يبصوا في الكوريكولم بتاع الأولاد، كل واحد في السن بتاعه، الأمهات مثلا مع بعض يقولوا نبص في مناهج الأولاد، ولو لقوا حاجة يبعتوا جوابات للسكول ديستريكت، أو يروحوا ويقولوا أنا مش عاوز تدرس أولادي زي ما قالت لنا أبي. كل دي طرق لينا ممكن نعملها عشان نحارب الموقف ده. These are all very good points and good options. Do you want to add any other options of this fight against this atrocity? Would you consider anything else?
Well, I'd just like to add, if the person visiting the school is the dad, is a father, studies show that's very influential. Yeah. When kids see a male parent show up at school and they're interested in it, it influences their attitude toward what they're doing. This is serious business. And my serious dad, is paying attention. Not that doesn't downplay moms, but schools are used to dealing with moms.
Absolutely.
And when the dads show up, it has a social and psychological impact that's different.
بيقول إنه كمان لو الأب هو اللي راح بنفسه ربما يكون له تأثير مختلف، لأنه دايما متعودين إن الأم هي اللي بتيجي مع الابن، البابا مشغول بيشتغل. لما بيجي الأب نفسه بيوري انه سيريس اباوت، وفي نفس الوقت بيوري اهميه النقطه دي بالنسبه له وبالنسبه للاسره كلها. So we have demonstrated, we have I think got everybody understanding the seriousness and the gravity of this issue and how it is important for us to act on it. Now, if we're not going to allow our children to be educated about this in a class setting, what other ways should we be doing this so that they don't end up in the locker room?
Right. The common argument is that my kid's going to hear it anyway, so why not let them participate in the class? So I know we're kind of going back a little bit. Again, I realize people have different levels of what's inappropriate, and I experience personally telling parents, I caution you against letting your child participate. And they said, well, we're a little bit more permissive. We're not worried. We can trust. And their kids would come back from school traumatized, in tears about what they saw. And I personally know parents who said, I should have opted my kid out. Right? So just if you're on the fence, it's okay to opt them out. Maybe your kid's just not old enough for this yet. Maybe you need another year to think about it. So don't be afraid to do that step. But what you're asking is, What do we do instead,
Yes.
right? So what do we do instead? We need to be the first ones to the conversation as parents. We need to tell our kids about sex from a biblical point of view, starting at a very young age, not to be embarrassed about it. God made you. He made you male and female. He made you to be, to be man and woman, to be married. Sex is a gift for marriage. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. And as they grow, you're kind of laying the foundation. Tell them about, boys and girls. Make sure they're clear on that. Tell them about what marriage looks like according to God's plan. So that when they see something, when they go to school, by the time they get to kindergarten and they meet a friend who's got a gay parents, you should have already explained to them what a mom and a dad looks like, and that's what God wants for us, and that we know people make different decisions. But just because people choose a different way, as for me and my house, we serve the Lord, so we're going to do what God says. So that way they can filter it through a biblical worldview and say, oh, my parents told me there's people who make bad choices, different choices, there's people who sin, but we know what the Bible says. That's just the groundwork that you do at home.
What age should you start talking to your kids?
About what male and female is and about what marriage looks like from the very beginning. I mean, they're learning it in your home, right? And then as they get older, you need to, one of the best things you can do, because sometimes we jump ahead of students, we jump ahead of them and tell them too much, is if they bring something up to you, they ask you a question, respond just like Jesus did with a question. Tell me more about that. What is it you really want to know, so that you're not shocking them too early with too much information. So you need to feel out you need to know your child and know what they're ready to hear, what they're not ready to hear. But constantly reinforcing that God has created you, God created male and female, that he created men and women for marriage. That's a message you can start with on day one and repeat it. It's okay. Just make sure you're being clear, what a family
What do you tell to your 9-year-old when she tell you where children come from, Mom?
Well, what did I do with my 9-year-old when I did that?
I knew I was preparing something for you.
Right. So again, I would ask questions. Well, what do you want to know? Because you hate to jump into a whole graphic description for a child who was like, I just wanted to, I just thought maybe they came from the hospital. But so ask them questions and you'll hear what they know already, and then you can give clarifying
you give the answer
information
based on their knowledge and their acceptance and ability to
Yes,
to live
and
it.
in my house, for me, I've told my kids always, you can ask me anything. I will be honest with you. I will never lie to you. I will always tell you the truth. Now, I'll tell them age-appropriate version of the truth, but I will never lie
That's
to them.
a very good point.
Yeah.
Let me translate that
sorry.
because a lot of our audience. هي قالت انه هندي للاولاد ومش هنكذب عليهم ابدا، لازم المعلومات تكون على قد السن، age appropriate. يعني ممكن نديهم بعض المعلومات تناسب السن، وبتقول نسالهم في الاول عشان نفهم هم فاهمين ايه وعارفين ايه. ما يجوز الولد السبب انه بيسال السؤال ده انه هو حد قال له كلمه في المدرسه او وروه صوره في المدرسه على التليفون. دي الحاجات اللي بيتعرضوا ليها اولادنا. فما دام حصلت حاجه زي كده او شافها يبقى لازم نكلمهم ولازم نشرح لهم، وما فيش داعي للخجل. We should not be shy to explain to the children, especially if I was just telling them. Sometimes the kids will show them a picture on the phone,
Right.
and the kid would be shocked, but he wants to know what's this about. So age appropriate is a good term.
and you brought it up. It's curiosity. If kids hear something from their peers, they're curious. That's a normal thing to be. But unfortunately, most kids have access to a phone, so they're going to type it in and they're going to get wrong or disturbing information. So that's why you want them to know you can bring any question to me. You can ask me anything and I'll tell you the correct information. I tell my kids too, you think your friends don't know more than me. I'm a grown adult. Like, why would you go to your friend who knows nothing? Ask me, I'll tell you anything. So, it's just very open door policy. The phones are a whole other issue. You don't want them getting their information from the internet, for their friends and social media. And you need to give them correct, accurate information when they ask you so they trust you. If you avoid the question, if you give them sort of a nice sounding lie, they won't trust you. Yeah. So you can't do that. You really can't. You need to be honest. And it's okay to say to them, I'm going to explain more when you're older. I will tell you more detail when you're older, but you can stop that if you need to. But you need to give them, if they have a question, you need to answer it.
Our audiences, a lot of them are from a very, very conservative culture.
Yeah.
Talk about sex, David, to a son or to the daughter is a very difficult task.
Yeah.
And most of the time, the parents will either leave it to the mom, ask your mom about it, or they will allow the natural progression that happens, and gets come out quite often with corrupted ideas, what they heard. As a dad and a grandfather, how did you handle that?
Well, that's actually an opening for the church, too. If this is a problem that each individual needs to solve, typically you want the church and para-Christian organizations like Focus on the Family to help you solve that problem. In fact, there's an interesting California law that allows students to be excused for up to 4 days a month from the public schools to get religious and moral education.
Wow.
So a church that wants to solve this problem of what is age appropriate and how do we tell these stories, and usually it's in story form, I think to start out with at least. The graphic details are much later. It's usually, you know what's right and wrong because your parents have modeled it for you, not so much specifically telling you, so much as just modeling it for you. But it's something that the church could do too. Rather than put the burden on each individual parent who have different levels of competence and interest and ability, it would be very interesting to see churches face up to this problem and say, here is a curriculum that we can do, and we can actually teach it to public school students. Now, that particular law, which allows 4 days for religious and moral education a month for students, requires school districts to approve that. And so the first thing is for the church and the parents to go to the school district and get the school district to approve that statutory right, and then to provide through a school year, could it be, if it's 4 days a month, but once a week, you have a 1 hour class, and the church could teach the class and take care of that and help. It's not limited to the children of the Christians. The other people could be invited too. Give them an alternative. I don't pretend to be an expert on what that alternative should be, but there are experts out there, and there are proper curricula available for private use, and this is not a problem that can't be solved.
4 days they can be excused from school to learn about this subject or any other subject. But do they actually leave the campus and go outside on a retreat or something, or would they just stay there and be excused?
My memory is that you leave the campus, but yes, that statute is a leave the campus statute,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, gotcha.
So you'd probably go to some local church or some, whatever arrangement is to be made for that.
Well, you open a important role of the church in helping the parents in that. And أنا بقدم دعوة من هنا من الميكروفون ده لكل خدام مدارس الأحد اللي بيدرسوا الأولاد في السن ده 8 9 10 11 12 سنة، إنه ابتدوا تفكروا إزاي تدوا المادة دي للأولاد في السن ده. I'm inviting Sunday school teachers to consider a curriculum to be introduced at that age, 8, 9 to 11, and talk to them. I recall myself when I was, I think, 10 or 11. They invited us, and like I said, we come from very conservative background, and our religious beliefs in my church, the Coptic Orthodox Church, is very strict. Traces back to the early days of the church. So talk about sex was a no-no. But one time, one of our teachers invited us to give a class, and the title was Masturbation.
Oh, boy.
That was the name of the class. Can you imagine, we all read the note, turned upside down, and looked at each other. And it was a wonderful class, was well prepared for and spoke about it from a biological point of view and then gave a religious background and tied it to the wrong thinking that accompanies it. So it was an eye-opener to us, yet during that class all of us were looking at our feet and we were very shy, but we learned a lot. So there's some for the Sunday school teacher to learn. أقولها تاني بالعربي، من فضلكم الناس اللي بيدرسوا السن ده لازم تهتموا بالمواضيع دي، لأنه إذا إحنا بنقول إنه المعلومات السكس إديوكيشن اللي بيديها لهم في المدارس معلومات غلط، لازم إحنا نديهم البديل ونديهم المعلومات الصح، ويبقى كوريكولم مدروس ومفهوم من دكاترة وأطباء وآباء كهنة يابروفت ويحطوا المنهج الصحيح اللي ممكن يدرس للأولاد لأنهم محتاجين المعلومات دي جدا.
The woke people want to get it younger and younger because they want to get around parents having a chance to teach their children. You know, so if you wait till age 10, the woke people say, well, we'll get them from ages 6, 7, and 8, and confuse them, if not totally corrupt them, on these topics, because they're well aware that if you allow the parent to have control of the moral upbringing of the child, which is what the Constitution says we're supposed to have, it's extremely difficult. You're not going to convert people into a gay lesbian lifestyle when they're teenagers if they've had parental influence, you know, from this time. But if you've been able to confuse them from childhood, then you have a much better chance, and that's what they want to do.
Excellent point. يعني هو بيقول ديفيد ان احنا لازم نبتدي ايفن بدري، لان احنا لو ابتدينا نكلمهم من 10 و11 هم بقى ياخدوهم من سن 6 و7 ويبتدوا يعلموهم الحاجات دي، وزي ما قالت لنا ابي انه الحاجات دي مش بس في السكس اديوكيشن، ده في المناهج الثانيه بيبتدوا يدخلوا الحاجات دي في دماغهم. ولذلك I don't know if we have the stats of pregnancy in high school or sexually active in high schools. Do you have the stats, Abby?
If you let me round the numbers, I remember them, but I don't have them written down. Surprisingly, fewer kids are sexually active in high school than you might think. I think most of us think, at least they want us to think, everyone's going to do it in high school, so we might as well tell them how to do it safely or well. But the reality is, if I remember correctly, it was about 40% of students are sexually active by the end of high school years. And so that means the majority, 60% of these young people are not participating in sex. And so you're exposing them to something that they aren't doing. Now, those numbers fluctuate and they change over time. The 90s, like I said, in the 1990s was the high peak for sexual activity, STDs, abortion, pregnancy, etc. And it has come down somewhat. But it's still the majority. So your kids don't need to feel like they're doing something odd. They're actually in the majority, but nobody talks about that. Even just that, if you just told students, hey, did you know that most kids are not sexually active in high school? I mean, the relief, oh, really? I'm not a weirdo because I'm trying to do what my parents and what God says to do, you know?
Wonderful. This is a good information. While I still think 40% is a high number.
It is. It is.
It just puts it in the minority to some extent.
Yeah.
I think we have another call. Dr. Aziz, welcome.
أهلا دكتور محفوظ.
أهلا بيكي.
أنا الحقيقة يعني عايزة أقول لحضرتك إني بالصدفة سمعت برنامج من CYC عن السكس education والهوموسيكشواليتي بطريقة from a Christian point of view واللي كان بيقولها الدكتور هاني عشام الله.
Okay.
فالحقيقة المحاضرة دي more than wonderful. هي كلها بالإنجلش وكانت for elementary school, elementary students. And each one of them during the lecture, he has a chance to stand up and say his name and mention the question. And Dr. Hani answered it in a very, very nice way from a biblical point of view. So I hope that this lecture could be even translated into Arabic and then to be broadcasted on all the Christian channels because it's really, really wonderful work.
شكرا دكتورة عزيز، أشكرك على المعلومة دي. Just mentioning that there was a lecture presented by a famous physician that lectured to our community, and address those issues, and she's bringing this to our attention. واحنا ندعو الناس برضو انهم يدوروا عليها تبع قناه شقيقه CYC، ودكتور هاني طبعا معروف وكل الناس عارفه انه هو ممكن. فهي دي كلها محاولات ان احنا نعلم الناس ونشجعهم انهم يتكلموا وانهم يعلموا اولادهم. One last option, of course, and you probably would agree with me, is to, if you can afford it, put your kids in private schools rather than public school, where the education is catered more towards the benefit of the children, is not a condensed curriculum that's shoved down their throats that they sometimes don't need it. And أنا عاوز أخذ الفرصة دي وأتكلم على مدرسة هنا في الكنيسة بتاعتنا. We have actually a private school here, so give me a minute to tell people about it. والمدرسة دي اسمها سان ماري سكول. بتدرس هنا في الكنيسة، وطبعا بيعلموهم المبادئ المسيحية السليمة، وبيحضروا القداس وبيتناولوا ويعلموهم المبادئ السليمة. وطبعا بالتأكيد لو في المسألة دي أثيرت بيردوا عليها بالطريقة السليمة. أنا بشجع الناس اللي يحبوا يعرفوا معلومات عنها. التليفون بتاعهم 818-345-3500 818-345-3500. ولو حد عاوز يتصل هيكلم على طول مديرة المدرسة دي، النمرة بتاعتها 818-345-3500، وهيتكلم معاها ويسألها كل الأسئلة اللي عاوز يسألها. لكن ده another alternative طبعا اللي يقدروا. لكن معظم أولادنا بيروحوا المدارس الحكومية، وأنا حتى أولادي في البداية وهم صغيرين وديتهم مدارس خصوصية، لكن لما كبروا ووصلوا junior high, I put my kids in public schools when they were that age, because I wanted them to be exposed to the world.
Right.
But we did monitor them very well, and we did actually notice all these things, and we tried as much as possible to counter the effect of the wrong information they might be receiving.
Over the past 2 years, 1.2 million people have left the public school system. 1.2 million students have left the public school system, partly because of COVID and partly because of these woke, progressive curricular problems that we've been discussing.
Interesting stats بيقول إنه 1.2 مليون طالب سابوا المدارس الحكومية بسبب كوفيد، وبسبب برضو المناهج التعليمية البروجريسيف دي اللي هي المتفتحة زيادة عن اللزوم اللي بيقدموها للأولاد. بلا شك إن المشكلة اللي قدمناها النهاردة مشكلة بيشعر بها كل الناس. وأنا بقول إنه إحنا لما ابتدينا نتكلم عن الموضوع ده من حوالي أسبوعين أو أكتر، كتير من الأمريكان اللي كنا بنتكلم معاهم بيشعروا نفس الشعور اللي إحنا بنتكلم عليه هنا. في ناس كتيرة متضايقة من الطريقة اللي بيدرسوا أولادنا بيهم، ومحاولة تحويل المجتمع إلى مجتمع جنسي في فكره، وإنه ياخدوا الأولاد من هم صغيرين ويعرفوهم على الجنس ويشجعوهم لممارسة الجنس. أمر صعب خالص، وده يعني دامجنج للسوسايتي كلها، مش بس للأولاد، ده دامجنج للعلاقات اللي هتبقى لما يكبروا ويبقى أهالي ويتجوزوا يبقى لهم أولاد. I was just saying how damaging that is to the entire society. It's not just to the children, but as they grow older and become adults, what kind of lifestyle they're going to live in, and we're seeing that the effect is already filtering in. I wanted to thank you so much. We've come to the end of our allotted time, but I certainly enjoyed that conversation. I've learned quite a bit. I learned a lot, and I think our audiences did. David, I want to thank you so much. You came on a very short notice, and you give us wealth of information. I appreciate it. Abby, you're wonderful, and what you're doing is beautiful, and I hope you continue to be a role model for all the mothers and the moms and active in the community.
And thank you for having me. It's been a delight to get to know your family. They're wonderful, and they're bringing that biblical worldview to your church, to the schools, and that's what we want. We want kids to know the truth. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. أحبائنا المشاهدين، نشكركم جزيلا على حسن استماعكم. نتمنى إنه إحنا نكون تعلمنا شيء من الحلقة النهاردة، ونطلب نصلي إن ربنا يعني هو اللي يحافظ على أولادنا ويحافظ عليهم، لكن إحنا لينا دور. نراكم في حلقة قادمة من المسيحي والمجتمع.